on student participation, particularly in the AP Literature classroom. The reason was I didn't want to get into a rote routine, being redundant, but I didn't want to get into this pattern where kids were doing study guides all the time and they felt like they had to, and I was telling them what they had to look at all the time in the literature we were reading. I wanted them to be able to bring into a discussion what they wanted to look at, but then be able to still support it with their own ideas and their evidence. And so that also meant that I had to find a way to hold them accountable during discussion in my mind. If I wasn't going to have them showing me by these questions they had answered that they'd done their reading, how was I going to keep them accountable? So I started the year thinking that my inquiry was going to be, how can I come up with a system to basically grade their participation in discussion? And the thing I found is that made me so focused on who was talking, less than what they were saying, and kids also became more focused on, was I marking them down? And also I had experience from the previous year where kids would come up to me and say, I did talk in that discussion, you just didn't write it down. And then it's like my memory against his or hers, and it was just, it never felt good to me. So over time, what I realized what I was really looking for was strategies to encourage a more diverse and equitable participation from an array of voices across the classroom. And so my focus really sort of shifted at that moment in time, and I started experimenting with different types of ways to get kids participating in the classroom, whether it was in a whole class dynamic, but a lot more in smaller groups, and ways that I could still see evidence of their contributions to the discussion. So they would do things like they would get in a group and they would have to sort of record group notes on something they had talked about and then leave it there, and another group would come and talk about the same topic and add to those notes. So they were kind of building off of each other without necessarily being in that whole class dynamic. And I also found really quickly that while I wanted this answer from them, oh yeah, we all love whole class discussion, or oh yeah, we all love small groups, it was impossible. Half of them liked whole class, half of them liked small discussion, half of them thought fish bowls were awful, half of them thought, oh, I totally get why teachers do that. So it was just I really just realized that you need a lot of variety. But really what I think was most interesting is what this sort of led me to is to sort of redefine participation overall. So my inquiry really sort of evolved over time. And it really led me to sort of realize it became more about the quality of what was being said, but then it also became that it wasn't just necessarily the kids who were talking all the time, that you can be participatory in other ways by being alert and engaged without necessarily always saying what you're thinking. And that really led me to start thinking about metacognition and listening, which is sort of where I ended the year, focusing more on that. Even though my inquiry was really about participation, it really sort of changed over time. And honestly, it left me with a much better sense, or more relaxed about participation in my classroom and not feeling like it had to be this way all the time. So that's kind of how it evolved over time, and this idea eventually that a more reserved and quiet student could be just as participatory as another student, but maybe in a different dynamic. Maybe it wasn't in full class or a small group discussion, but maybe it was in a partner work or even presenting out in front of the class. A student can be really great at that, and that's a type of participation, but it allows the student some time to process and plan before they actually have to get up and present. So it really helped me redefine participation in my classroom.